people of all ages. It's the Dark and Stormy Nights, and this is Loki.
This is Tyr.
And Tyr has brought a story for you today. So, do we have any setup or anything?
No, just, the last chapter was kind of the end of the battle. We ended with Shaela taking down Annalise.
Yes.
And kind of just picked up from there in this one, so.
Okay. And I don't know if we need anything, but are we changing up? We're going to change up.
We changed up a little bit about how Rowan went down.
Right. Okay.
So she was like stabbed or mortally wounded or whatever by Annalise. But the same, basic information you already put into your
Did
chapter.
you address that at all?
I didn't specifically say that she was stabbed or anything. I just, showed that she was injured, and it, her little act of defiance nearly cost her life.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, let's see. Let's see where this goes.
Okay. Shaela squeezed Eliot until his ribs creaked, and while he struggled to catch up through the fog still clouding his head, he squeezed her back just as tight, instinctively knowing how close he'd come to never again having the opportunity. When the little dragon finally released him, Eliot took in the nearly empty room. "Where is everyone?" he asked, gingerly sliding from the table. "Outside. Fight's pretty much over now, but there's still a lot to deal with," Shaela answered. Eliot nodded, taking in the body on the floor, before his eyes drifted up to the only other person in the room. The elegant man stood quietly, watching their reunion with a gentle smile. His modern charcoal suit paired oddly with the ornate staff in his hand, one of the sorcerers from the tower, Eliot assumed. He opened his mouth to thank the man for his part in helping Eliot when a sense of familiarity held his tongue. Brow furrowed, Eliot cocked his head to the side. "I know you." He studied the man's flawless dark skin and the too familiar flicker of mischief in his golden eyes. "You were there that day at the hospital." The man's smile faltered, quickly shifting from friendly to wary. "I was," he agreed, somewhat reluctantly. Eliot tensed at the sound of his voice, and Shayla's eyes darted back and forth between them. "Eliot, is your head still messed up? You know him, that's Nigel." She frowned at the look on Eliot's face and turned to face Nigel with her fists on her hips. "You were supposed to fix him," she growled. Nigel pulled his eyes away from Eliot to soothe the temperamental little dragon. "Eliot will be just fine. This is the first time he's seen me without my glamour," Nigel explained, shifting his staff back to a coffee mug typically clutched in Bobby Ray's hand. Shaela rolled her eyes at herself. "Oh, right. I never even noticed that anymore." "You were the insurance man," Eliot muttered, wrapping his arms around himself. "The reason Pops left town." Shaela was confused again, but not liking the pain in her friend's voice, she once again turned a threatening glare on the sorcerer. Nigel held his hands up placatingly. I always pronounce that wrong, sorry.
You did right.
"Eliot, think about it. The best way to keep Pops safe was to get him out of town. The wolves already almost got to him once, and you were devastated when you thought he'd been hurt. Giving him that money kept him safe. You wouldn't have stood a chance against the wolves. It took a dragon to take them on." Eliot frowned and turned his attention back to Shaela. She beamed up at him. "I made them my bitches." Too emotionally drained to deal with the Nigel situation, Eliot gave Shaela his full attention. Arching an eyebrow at her declaration, he managed to smile. "This I've got to see." Shaela happily dragged Eliot out of the spell room and over to the window overlooking the battlefield. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. The last of the fight was over. Annalise was gone, and what remained of her army knew defeat when they saw it. The fighters, still standing, began rounding up those that surrendered, while still others required a little more force. Bodies littered the field, some moving, some not, but his eyes were drawn to the one just below. Rowan was sprawled on the hard concrete, her face slack and too pale, her breaths too shallow and too slow. The Fey healers approached as he watched, pressing a hand to the glass. A delicate hand rubbed his shoulder, and he turned to find Wren staring down at the broken body as well. It's hard to understand, but she really didn't have a choice. A choice in what? Eliot asked. She was working with Annalise. Eliot's head snapped around so fast his head spun. What? A mix of emotions whirled through him, settling heavily in his gut. Betrayal, hurt, confusion, anger, regret. And he had no doubt it all played out clearly on his face. Wren gave him a sad smile. More precisely, she was owned by Annalise. It's a long story. Just know that she came through when it really counted. Jaw tight, he turned his attention back to Rowan as the healers started gathering up their supplies, despite the fact that she still hadn't moved. What do you mean? I mean that she went out there to help with the wolves, but she was defenseless against the rest of it. A bound fae can't take action against the fae that bound them. So when we all lost track of Annalise, Rowan did the only thing she could. She sent up a flare of magic to get our attention, and it nearly killed her. Shaela sighed. That flare was what made me able to find Annalise and track her here before she could kill you and Nigel, she admitted like it pained her. Will she be okay, he asked, as the healers carried her away, adding guilt and concern to the mix. They'll do everything they can for her. Wren patted his shoulder and headed away. I'm going to go see if I can find Lee. Eliot nodded, dragging himself away from the window as well, wanting to make sure the rest of his friends made it through without injury. He followed after Wren, making it all the way to the lobby before a snarl pulled their attention from the door. Before Eliot even knew what was happening, his back hit the tile floor and a heavy weight landed on his chest, knocking the wind out of him. Wheezing, he shoved his hands into the chest of the man that had landed on him, but his gasping "what the hell" was cut off when with a choked gurgle when the man's hands wrapped around Eliot's throat. Panic didn't even have time to register before the man was ripped from Eliot's body and thrown into the far wall of the lobby. Shaela helped Eliot stand and then turned to face the crowd that had gathered. This human, she jabbed a finger in Eliot's direction, is off limits and under my protection. Is that clear? She asked with more than a little growl in her voice. Most of the wolves fell in, showing their necks in submission, but two rushed over to help the wolf that had attacked Eliot, and when they faced the little dragon again, they did not look happy with the order. Their staring contest was broken when one of the wolves lifted his nose to the air before zeroing in on where Lee and Wren had entered the increasingly crowded lobby. Shaela sighed. That human too, I guess. Low rumbles vibrated through the room, coming from the three defiant wolves, but Shaela held her ground. Eliot, can you have Nigel find me a room we can use? Apparently, I have to have a little meeting with my pack. I'll go find him, Eliot agreed easily, disappearing back the way they came, and quite relieved to have an excuse to be away from the hungry-looking wolves. Shaela marched over to a long wooden table with high-backed velvet-padded chairs and planted herself at the head of it. This will do, she decided as she tucked her legs under her and folded her hands on top of the table. Gunnar and Ingrid followed, standing on either side of her chair, while Ivan took up guard just inside the door. Eliot wandered in behind the tall, blonde wolf warrior and made his way over to take a seat next to Shaela. The little dragon waved a hand at Ivan. Bring them in. Ivan slipped back through the heavy wood door, returning a moment later with two fuming wolves. While most of the pack had fallen in line easily, excepting their new alpha, the three directly related to the wolf they blamed Eliot and Lee for killing were clearly going to be a problem. No sooner had Eliot left the room than the wolf that she'd dented the plaster with had made a move for Lee. Being a young alpha, challenges were to be expected, but to let such disrespect slide would be a huge mistake. She gave Ivan a nod, and he disappeared once more, this time taking longer as the tense silence lingered. When the wolf again returned, this time he carried another over his shoulder, dropping the man onto the table with a thud. The two wolves took in their fallen comrade before turning their matching glares on her. It wasn't actually as bad as it looked. She'd used a little of her magic to add a sleeping spell to her hit, and it was a good trick for dramatic impact in times like these. The wolves had watched in shock as she knocked the man out cold with one punch while remaining in human form, and he wouldn't be waking anytime soon either. Shaela took her time, settling back in her seat and tapping her fingers to the table, her gold rings clacking loudly against the wood. "Gentlemen," she muttered in a low, hoarse voice that made Eliot arch a brow at her. "What have I done to deserve such disrespect?" "You protect our brother's killer," one answered. "You killed our alpha," the other chimed in unhelpfully. Ignoring their outburst, she continued on. "You come to me on this day of my friend's zombie birthday." "Zombie birthday?" Eliot muttered out of the side of his mouth. "You were dying. We brought you back to life. It's your zombie birthday." "Duh." She cleared her throat again. "You come to me on this day of celebration, and you cause trouble for my family. You didn't come to me and ask me for my help. You didn't even think to call me Alpha. Had you come to me in friendship, then your enemies would be my enemies." "Wait, what?" Eliot asked, slightly alarmed, when the angry wolves settled their vicious glare on him. Clearly, they had no questions about who their enemy was. Shaela extended one of her hands towards Eliot, and he quickly realized what he was supposed to do. Clearing his throat, he took her hand and kissed the back of it. "I ask for your help, Alpha." Shaela nodded. "And you will have it." She patted the back of his hand. "Consider this my gift for your zombie birthday." Turning her attention back to the wolves that had suddenly realized their mistake, Shaela grinned, her teeth just a little too long and too sharp to be human. "Gentlemen, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse. If you leave now and never return, I'll let you live. This is my city. The people in it are mine. Every building, every piece of property belong to me as long as they remain within the borders of what's mine. No second chances. If I find you in my territory, you'll be nothing more than a bad memory. Take your friend and go before I change my mind." The wolves, realizing their options were limited, scooped up their snoring buddy and stormed out. Eliot shook his head at Shaela once they were gone. "That was crazy. Even I was a little scared." Shaela pressed her fingertips together. "Someday, I may call on you to do a service." Eliot smirked. "How long are we running with this mob boss thing?" She sighed. "Let me have my moment." Eliot chuckled. "Fine, why don't we see if we can get Nigel to order pizza? I'm starving." She jumped up from her seat and raced for the door. "I'm on it." Eliot made his way down the hall, trying to find where Shaela had disappeared to. Instead, he found Nigel and Lee talking in low voices until they saw him coming. Lee slapped a hand on his back and pulled him into a hug. "Hey, kid, glad to see you're doing better." Until Lee had hugged him, Eliot hadn't really considered how close he must have come to dying. "I guess I was in pretty bad shape, huh?" Lee huffed out a breath. "I'd say. I wasn't sure Nigel was going to be able to pull it off." Eliot nodded. "Did Shaela find you guys? She was wanting to order pizza. And we can finally celebrate your retirement, Lee. Going out with a bang." Lee rubbed a hand on the back of his neck. "Actually, I think I'm going to stick around for a while, kid. There's a lot to be done. Changes to the Combine and the aftermath of everything." A crease formed between Eliot's brows. "But Lee, you were so looking forward to this, to finally being done." Lee shrugged and shifted his weight. "Some things are more important." That was true enough, but Lee wouldn't meet his eye, and Eliot was getting the feeling he was missing something. He looked to Nigel to see if he was getting the same weird vibes, only to find that Nigel was also being weird. Finding the lapel of his jacket extremely interesting. Picking at imaginary lint, the man smoothed down the fold of his suit and pulled out his cell phone. "Pizza does sound good. I'll place an order." Eliot's eyes narrowed. "Nigel, how intense was this healing that you did on me?" Nigel's thumb paused on his phone screen, and the man finally met his eye. "It It was a close thing, Eliot. Lee's right. It was almost beyond my capability. A chill ran down Eliot's spine at the knowledge that he almost hadn't made it. Remembering the favor that he still owed Zana, he cleared his throat. Then I must be in your debt. You can't heal a life without payment. It was Nigel's turn to shift uncomfortably. Actually, you don't owe me anything, Eliot. But Nigel wasn't looking at Eliot when he said it. He was looking at Lee. A sinking feeling hit Eliot in the gut, and his jaw dropped right along with his stomach. Lee, you didn't. Lee groaned and shoved a hand through his hair. Kid, it ain't like I had a lot of choice. You were dying. Eliot buried his face in his hands. It was his fault. He was the reason Lee couldn't retire, even though it was the only thing the man had wanted as long as he'd known him. Transfer the debt to me, Eliot demanded. Nigel shook his head. I can't. The magic is binding. There's no way to undo it until the terms of service are met. Eliot deflated. That meant Lee was stuck until the terms were met. He couldn't take the debt, but he could help him pay it back. His eyes met Lee with new determination. Looks like we're going to be working together a lot more, old man. We're taking the biggest bounties they've got, and we're going to get you to retirement before you know it. Nigel smiled and started walking down the hall, dialing the pizza place. Great. We know for a fact that at least a few trolls managed to escape the roundup. Good to know you two are on board for that. Lee groaned, rubbing a hand over his face. I'm too old for this shit, he grumbled, following after Nigel. Okay, that's
Nice. Good. That's funny. You played out Shaela well.
I literally had to watch like mob movie scenes.
I'm not sure. Like maybe we should go back and sprinkle her watching this shit. Like,
well, she's 100 years old, so
True.
I figured, you know.
Yeah. Over time, I've just said like maybe like one or two instances where we even just mention that. You know.
Yeah, her watching.
Come on,
The
Eliot. Let's watch
Godfather
Scarface.
and, yeah.
Or maybe put a Scarface poster up in her apartment, like when we, you know, so it's all elegant and everything, but there's a Scarface poster,
Right.
You know.
Or she's obsessed with like The Sopranos or something.
Yeah. She loves mobster movies. That'd be great. So, well, I mean, that's an out of the ordinary thing, right? I mean, there's a dragon who identifies as a little girl, right? Who's into mobster movies. Like, that's just like you think, I don't know, like that not that. You know, like that's your fandom. But, you know, we don't shame fandoms here.
Right,
So,
right.
No, that was really good.
Thank you.
So, okay, anything else for today?
Not really. I feel like we have a little bit of wrap up and then we're pretty much done.
Yep. So one more chapter that will be like the overarching wrap up, the big
like
things.
An epilogue kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Just, you know, what are those things you want to know about the universe? Did the Empire come back? Yeah.
Right.
So we'll find out. All right. We'll see you next time. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter at the Dark Stormy K1, on Reddit r/Dark and Stormy Nights, on Facebook, anywhere podcasts can be found, YouTube. Don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, comment, everything. We want to hear from you. So see you next time.
Bye.